In this video, I'm going to cover the second module of session one. We're going to just be briefly reviewing first what we covered in module one. But before I show you that, I want to show you a bit of a cool trick. If you have a new notebook opened up in Google, you can actually just upload this exact code with just a really easy trick by clicking Upload Notebook, going over to the GitHub tab, pasting in this GitHub link here, and pressing the search button. And it should actually now just have imported all of that code. So it's actually a bit easier to at least have the headings. Now, one of the reasons I kind of want to discourage you from doing this is it'll kind of, I think, maybe make you, or it could make you lazy, and you can just kind of run the code and it will um, you don't really have to do much manipulation in order to get it to work. When you're actually physically typing it or copying and pasting it over, I think it can be a bit better. But in any case, I just want to now cover what we covered last time. So we have the first type of data type is just a string. And so when you run this piece of code, now you will have um, that object that you have saved. In this case, it says my string. We can overwrite an object by just setting it equal to the exact same name, putting an equal sign, and then typing in whatever else that we want to write. So if I did this and run, nothing will show up because I didn't have a print statement where I didn't type in the name of the string. So I run it, and now it will show that string. We also covered integers and floats. Basically, it's just a fancy way to say number. We save it the same way as our string object, set it equal to whatever my number equals to, and we run it. And run it. And it's a float. So the type function will give us the type of data that our object is. And we also covered lists, and we also covered selecting the list. And that can be done by typing in the name of the list and then two numbers. So where it starts, where you want it to end. So in this example, I am taking the 0th element, which is in the first position here. A bit confusing. Remember that Python starts with zero numbering, and it's going to take the 0, 1, the 0 and the 1 elements, but not the 2 because it's not inclusive as I put here. We can also do negative numbers. So this will give us starting from the second to last item and running through the entire remainder of the list. So this would be the third to last item. You can do it, set it like that. So I really encourage you to play around with this to try to get a better intuition for it. And now I kind of want to introduce one more data type. And this is called a dictionary. So it kind of looks more similar to this list, but you'll notice that there's kind of two elements within each line, so to speak. In the list, we just have one object and then a comma. And in a dictionary, we actually have two objects separated by a colon and then a comma after those two items. And so the list, you can again save it like any other object. You just come up with a name and you can run it. Dictionary, and it will spit out that dictionary. Now, the dictionary, there's actually two kind of sides to it. The first left side is what are called the keys, and the right side are what are called the values. And so if we type in the name of our dictionary and we type in dot values, then that dictionary will just print off the left or the right side, excuse me, the values. And if we type in the name of our dictionary and keys, it will print off the left side, which are the keys. So I'm teaching you this because we'll actually use it a little bit later in pandas. So I promised that there was a reason for this. Let's just now cover what we covered last week. When we want to import the pandas library, we import pandas library, and we imported it as PD. So whenever we want to use the pandas library, we have to use PD dot and then the name of the function. There's a bunch of different types of functions. Read a stata file, read a CSV file, reading an Excel file, reading an HTML file. There's a lot of things that we could do. In this case, I'm going to read an Excel file that is just a link from a web page on the internet. So I'm running it. And then after I have saved it as this object called df, I'm going to use the head function, which shows us the first couple rows. We can see that this type is a data frame, which is good, and it's part of the pandas libraries, which means that it worked. And then we have a number of other functions that I introduced in the last video that I'm not going to cover here because I think you can refer to the last video, but I highly encourage you to kind of play around with these here. Maybe uncomment them out one by one and try playing around with it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is to start selecting columns. I briefly introduced you to this concept last time. We can put the name of the column that we want to grab inside two brackets. So we can see the column names by this columns function. As you can see here, these are the names of our columns. If we don't want to see them all, because it's a list, we can kind of subset it. So this will just show me the first four elements, the 0, 1, 2, and 3 of the list. And so we can just type in the name of some column that we want to see, and then I'm just putting the head function there so it's not too long. Like if I just did that, then it kind of shows you the longer list. I don't want to do that. So that's one way to select it, by putting the name of the column, and it has to be in quotes inside brackets. The other way you can do it is to just type a period and then the name of the column afterwards. And then this is a new concept that I wanted to show you. It's called the LOC function, lock function, and it works similar to this method right here, but instead of just one simple argument or one simple, I guess, column name, you split it up into two parts. So the first part of the lock function is the row, and the second part is the column. So if we wanted to print off just the country column in this data set, we would put this country, let's split it up. Let's create a new list called column list, and let's put in a few column names, and then in that lock function, let's put that column list. And as you can see, it's now selected those three columns. We didn't have to split it up. We didn't have to save this object. We could just put that directly in there. But creating a separate list object just kind of increases the readability a little bit. So that's how that works. So the lock function is pretty convenient to select columns, and as I'll show you below, it's really nice to select rows as well. One thing to note about Python in general, and and I guess in this instance is that we don't actually have to space our code like that. We can easily make it look a little bit wonky like this. Why we want to do that is because sometimes it's nice to write comments on the side here. So if we ran this, it would work despite the fact that it is in a bit of a different format. Now what you can't do is like this, because this would be commented out. So it will run, but it's not selecting that country column because it's been commented out. So just be careful about that if you're going to do this method. And yeah, so that is how to use the lock function. Now, I want to talk more, kind of an extension of this conversation about subsetting data. And all of this is kind of boring, I promise. I promise at some stage I will teach you some more interesting stuff, but it's really important to grab the basics of pandas. So subsetting data, I can't stress enough how important this is. I mean, I do this all the time in research. It's again a little bit boring and dry, but in order to get to the more interesting concepts such as algorithm design or neural networks or fancy things like that, then we have to be able to get the data in a position that we can use it. So first I want to show you about subsetting columns, which we actually just did up here. This is subsetting columns. And I just want you to visualize that. If you have a data set, you can kind of, grab a couple of columns and then kind of stick it in a format or a new data frame, and then it will kind of look something like that. So in this case, I am going to grab using the lock function. I'm going to grab these 4 columns. Again, very similar to what I did before. So that's the first way you can do it. And the second way you can do it is by just subsetting it like that. But I don't encourage this method because you can't subset row because it doesn't have that little colon there. That's only available with the lock function. So if we run this, now you'll notice that our data, it looks a little different. And I actually purposefully saved it as a new object. So this is actually kind of nice in Python because that original df data is still our original data. And now our subset data is named a new data object. So now if I want to refer back to the original code, I still can. I can kind of look back. And then this is the name of our new data set. So that's how to subset the columns. And now I want you to try to think about subsetting the rows. So it's, again, just visualizing what that would look like. So it's taking out these slices, putting them in a new data frame. So this time I want to try to subset the data set by countries. So I can show unique values of any column by typing in the column name and then the unique function. So try this out maybe with a couple of other columns. So data.year.unique. Well, that's going to give us a lot of values, but you get the picture. You can do this with any other column as well. So please try that out. It's less useful when you're working with continuous data because there's really no overlap, but with kind of categorical data like this, it's easier and it allows us to subset. So in this case of subsetting, we're going to use the lock function again instead of this method. And the first thing we're going to do though is create this kind of special kind of object in Python. And that object is kind of a true or a false. So this true or false, it works as follows. If you have the data.country column, if you type this in, you'll notice that you get that column. And so I can actually get Python to evaluate whether this is equal to something by typing equal to some value. So in this case, I'm going to say USA. And what you'll notice is that the rows that were not USA should appear as false, and the rows that are USA should appear as true. And so once I have that, I can save it as this object here. I'm just calling it a mask because I guess that's what it's called. And so now when I save this as an object, you'll see that it's just kind of looks like the column shape that we had before. And so now I can actually put that mask object inside that lock function. And so then we can kind of subset those rows. So actually, let's change this to USA. Let's put the mask on there, and then you'll see that now the data has been subset. So I can actually just save that. If I save the object, I want to remove the head function. So now I have this data USA. And so this will just be a data set now with only USA. Well, why is lock function convenient? Well, you might notice that actually we can subset again within the function by saying, okay, maybe I just want to take all of the USA rows, but I only want to take the country and population column. I want to get rid of the GDP. Let's put it in year. And so if we type this in, now you'll notice that we have now only 3 columns. So that's why we use lock. Now we can also subset the rows by multiple conditions. So we can tell the data frame, we can actually create another mask based on whether the country is equal to Australia or, so this symbol is or, France. And then we can pop that mask directly in the lock function. Again, you have to be very careful if you were to pop the lock function, or if you were to pop that mask in the wrong side, it's not going to work because this is the column. So make sure that you pop that mask into the row. And so now we have that data again subset. And as always, we can overwrite. We can either overwrite the data by setting the data equal to that name, or we can just create another new one and get rid of that head function, because if we had left the head, it's only going to take the first 2 rows. So now it looks like we were able to successfully do that. So that is how to subset multiple conditions using the or condition. So in this case, it was USA or France. But there's also an and condition. So if I run this, what you'll notice is that it didn't work. And why is that? We'll take a moment to think about that. That's because the country cannot be simultaneously Australia and France at the same time. It's binary, right? So countries can either be one or the other. They can't be both. We use the or condition, or sorry, we use the and condition in the following ways. Oftentimes we'll want to subset some category, and then we also want to subset a different, say, column. So in this example that I'm giving here, I'm saying I want the data to be from Australia and for GDP to be over 3,274. So I'll show you why I did that. So you'll notice that the first GDP here is actually under this number. So what this should do is erase this first row. And what you'll notice is that that first row has now been erased. As always, if we wanted to save over, we would have to set it equal to, or we can create a new column. And the last way to do a row subset is to use the is_in function. So let's just break this down because it's a bit confusing. I'm just going to create a list. This is a country list. I'm going to type in the name of the column that I'm interested in, and then I'm going to type in is_in. It's the is_in function. And inside of that, I'm going to put in this country list. And what you'll notice is, let's just do USA and Australia because those are the ones that are at the start and the end of our data set. So you can see if it worked. And what you'll see is now both of them have been turned to true. So once we have that mask created, we can just stick it in there and then we can run it, and then the data's been subset. Again, I think I showed this earlier, but with the lock function, we can combine a mask for the rows and a mask for the columns, and it will work. Okay, so that's really kind of getting over the very dense material. Again, not very exciting, but very necessary in order to try to understand how to manipulate data. So now I just want to introduce you to a few other useful functions before I let you go. There's the head function as we went over before. There's also this value counts function. So what you'll notice here now is that there's a lot of functions that can be used after you select a certain column. So there was the unique function. There was, what else do we have? I guess that's maybe the main one we've used so far. So we can also use the value counts function. So that will give us value counts. Got to make sure that the spelling is correct. This will give us a number of unique observations. Again, if we used it with like population or GDP, it might not make a lot of sense, but because they're not categorical. But if we did want to maybe understand, say, the population, we could use something like a describe function that I think I showed you earlier. Actually, we cannot use the describe function because the describe function is only good for the whole entire data set. And that just gives you the basic statistics. If you notice here, I have two pieces of code running, and what that will do is only print off the one at the bottom. So make sure if you want to run a line of code and you're not using the print statement, that you are just aware of that. If you put a print statement on both of these, it's going to print both of them. So we'll do them both. So value counts is pretty convenient when trying to understand how many observations and unique observations. Okay, and so I've already introduced this concept now, the unique function with the year column. Again, I want you to try to play around with the different columns to see what it does. And we can also use it as a mask. So here I am, let's break this up. Here I am going to create this subset. This subset's just a couple of years. It's just a list of years. And I'm going to stick it in this year.isIn. So the isIn function. So it's just asking each row in the year column, it's asking it whether it's in this list of years. So run that. And again, if you just type in a mask, you'll see it's true or false. And so now that we have that mask created, we can stick that in the lock function, and now we'll only have a few years selected. We can do a further subset by just typing in. Right. Okay, now I want to kind of introduce you to a little bit more advanced concept, although what we just covered is probably pretty advanced enough, but this is a really convenient piece of code. It's called the pivot table function. And so essentially what that does is we can take this table and kind of flip it from the long format to the wide format. So this function you see here, what I'm typing in is pivot table after I type in the name of our data frame. And there's three things that you type inside. So the first is the index. The index is what you see on the left side here. It's basically this row. Well, actually, in this case, it's the 0, 1 here. And the columns, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's what is up here. And then you type in the name of values that you're interested in seeing. So this is the column that you're looking to see the data for. So if you type in this, let's type it here first. you'll notice that now Australia has been flipped up to a column up here, and then this data is now right here. But then it's kind of convenient because you can look at any of the other countries too. And basically what that did was just put those countries up into the column and put the values below. So it's pretty convenient. And I think we might even be able to just plot this. If you just type in plot, then you can see how the populations developed. So if I wanted to save that as a new object, I could just save it. I would not want to save it with the head function, or else we would only have 2 rows. All right, I'll show you what that would do. The head function, it means that I only get 3, the first 3 rows. We don't want to have that there. So that is the pivot table. It's super convenient. There's also the group by function that I want to show you, and that essentially groups some piece of data. So it's almost always a categorical data that goes inside the group by. So what I'm doing is grouping it by the country. And then what I am doing after that is selecting some column that I want to see grouped by and aggregated. And so in this instance, I'm using the last function, which is the last population reading. So in Australia's case, let's just type in this lock function really quickly to try to understand it. So it's data and country equals to Australia, and then that's going to go in there. So I'm not putting this in a mask. I can put this in a mask and then put that mask in there, and then we'll do the same exact thing. And then let's look at the tail. And what you'll notice is that the most recent population is 24233, and that's exactly what's showing here. So basically what this function is just grabs the last row for every single country. So let's look for Belgium. It's correct. Looks like it is. It's exactly the same. And we usually don't use this as much. A lot of times we use the group by and the mean function. So this could tell us, for example, the mean of this GDP column over the entire course of the history, but grouping it by the country. We could also, stick something else in there. Let's see here. What columns do we have? Unfortunately, we don't have any other columns really to group by, but you can try in our original DF, we could try group by ISO, and we could select, let's say, GDP, and then mean. And that will give us the mean GDP for each country across time. Now, these are the last things that I want to show you. I finally made use of that dictionary that I kind of introduced a lot earlier to you. Again, the left side is the key and the right side is the value. You don't really need to know so much about that, but what you should know is that it's often used to rename columns. And so I'm just creating this dictionary, and the left side of the dictionary will be the current column name, and the right side will be what you want to change the column name to. And you can also do this for multiple columns. So that's why I did 2. So if you look at our code before the change, our data looks like this with country and population in lowercase. But I want to change that current existing country and current population to these. And so I do that by using the rename function. And I type in columns equal to. So this is always the case if you want to change columns, you say columns equal to, and then you type in the name of that dictionary that we had saved up there. And it didn't work because that dictionary was not saved, and now it does, right? So if we were to go back up here and change it, we would have it changed. And if we wanted to overwrite and save, we would have to set it equal to and get rid of the head function. Let's rename it though. Okay, so now it's been renamed. There. We can also rename rows. We're going to use again that we are going to use that dictionary. So the left side again is the existing name and the right side is what you want to turn it to. And so you just type in with a comma. You need to make sure that this separates the left and the right side. So I'm just using 2 as an example, but we can also add another one. I don't know. That. And so we type in the name of our data set, we type in the name of the column we want to convert, and then we type in the replace function. And then inside we put in that name. If we wanted to overwrite that data, we would type in data.country and set that equal to that. And then we would have successfully changed the names. Well, how do we know we successfully changed the names? Well, we have that nice little convenient unique function, which will show us the unique values, and you can see now that it has been changed, right? So we have different names now. And then the last thing I want to show you is how to drop columns. Using the drop function, we can create a list, type in the name of our data set, the drop function inside, we put in that list, and then we set axis equal to 1, which is the column, and we type it, and then it will drop it. That was a little long. I think because the first 2 sessions were a bit dense, I'm going to try to get into some, I guess, more interesting topics next week, possibly graphing, or maybe even introducing you to the concept of machine learning and regression. But I look forward to seeing some of you attend my session this Friday, and hopefully you found these videos helpful.